I'll read for a little while. We are going to read the very last chapter of Charlotte's Web today. We are going to read chapter, what is it, 22? Chapter 22, A Warm Wind. And so remember what happened in the very last part that we read it is that what happened? Charlotte died, right? It was her time. She died. And Wilbur took her egg sac in his mouth to bring it home, right? Because do pigs have fingers? No, so he couldn't carry it in his fingers. So the only way he had to carry it was in his mouth. And he remembered Charlotte telling him that it was strong and waterproof. So he knew that it would be safe for him to carry it in his mouth because that was the only option he had.
Ava, turn that down.
Jay, I need you to mute yourself, please. Thank you. All right, so now we're just getting into chapter 2, A Warm Wind. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. It was a strange homecoming. Around his neck, he wore a medal of honor. In his mouth, he held a sack of spider eggs. There's no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelt good. His friends, the sheep and the geese, were glad to see him back. The geese gave a very noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen where visitors could examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, as he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web, we're not chit-chatting back there, my friends. A few strands of her old web still hung in the doorway. Every day, Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors and the wind shook them and they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the little red apples lay thick on the ground and the sheep gnawed them and the geese gnawed them and the foxes came in the night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered houses and barns and fields and woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. Hayden, that's not a good choice. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in his yard just for the fun of it. So do you think he really went out there with a plow and plowed the drifts? No. So when they're talking about Wilbur going out and plowing through the drifts, it means he's sticking his nose through it, right? The drifts of snow. So you can imagine the pig just kind of running through the snow, but doing the drifts through, going through the drifts with his little piggy snout. Okay, so that's what he's doing because he's never seen snow before, and many pigs don't, because a lot of them get butchered in the fall before the snow comes. Fern and Avery arrived. What, honey?
What does butcher mean?
Butchered. Remember how they talked about they were going to kill Wilbur so that they could eat him? That's butchering. When you kill the animal and then you cut him up into all the different pieces of meat that you eat, right? You make them in. If for a pig, they would become into bacon and ham and pork chops and things like that. And sausage, what?
One time I went with my dad to go kill a goat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if we're all going to talk about the animals we killed, we don't need to do that right now, okay? Tell me a recess. I'd love to hear about it. Louise, are you going to tell me about killing an animal, or do you have something, a question or something else? What? What?
We have turkey for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we have turkey for Thanksgiving because it's the animal has to be killed and butchered and cleaned. So, Jaya,
That we eat cows from the meat from the burger.
right? And so that's part of butchering. Is part of the cow. The part that's not really good for steaks or anything else. They grind up and they make it into hamburger meat, and that's just a fact of life, right? That's just part of the life cycle there. Some animals are born and raised simply so that then we have food later. And so anyway, Wilbur was going to be part of that life cycle, but because of Charlotte, he was saved because he became such a special pig. They decided not to eat him. Okay. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down the lane and out into the frozen pond in the pasture. Coasting is the most fun there is. And so what they mean is, sliding, coasting down the lane and out the pasture is when you're on the sled and you're just kind of sliding and going on for what feels like forever, and you're just going along so fast. That's what they're referring to as coasting. The most fun there is, reported Fern, is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are in the top car. And Henry makes the car swing, and we can see everything for miles and miles and miles. Goodness, are you still thinking about that old Ferris wheel? Said Avery in disgust. The fair was weeks and weeks ago. I think about it all the time, said Fern, picking snow from her ears. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled on the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn, too, for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung around the barnyard the way the boys hang around a drugstore. And by the drugstore is like the pharmacy and stuff, or like a small little store that you'd go to. No, we're not doing that. You're going to behave.
Miss,
Okay, what?
at Christmas, my dad makes some like a snow trap for J&D.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to keep going, okay? And Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips and kept them to keep them cheerful. Many, many, many thanks, they always said when they saw the food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig trough was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime. And Wilbur kept the promises he made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you'd ever seen. He was gigantic. He was about as big as a young woodchuck. Okay, so it's pretty big and fat. I'll show you the picture in just a minute. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. You will live longer, said the old sheep, if you ate less. Who wants to live forever, sneered the rat. I'm naturally a heavy eater, and I get untold satisfaction from the pleasures of a feast. He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack as though he were guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was as important as the small round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he awaited the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life was always rich and steady time when you're waiting for something to happen or hatch. The winter ended at last. I heard the frogs today, said the old sheep one evening. Listen, you can hear them now. Wilbur stood still and cocked his ears. From the pond in a shrill chorus came the voices of hundreds of little frogs. Sheep time, said the old sheep. Springtime, said the old sheep thoughtfully. Another spring, and as she walked away, Wilbur saw a new lamb following her. It was only a few hours old. Okay, guys, you need to be quiet and respectful to those people who are trying to listen to the story. Right, because what happens in spring? Little baby animals are born, and so it's talking about the changing of the seasons. So the frogs are coming out because they hibernate during the winter. The lambs are being born because it's becoming springtime. The snow melted and ran away. The streams and ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened and mornings came sooner. Because remember, the daytime gets longer during the spring and the summer, right? And then during the fall and winter, it gets shorter, and the sun comes up later in the morning, and it goes down earlier in the evening. The days are shorter, but now that we're slowly getting into spring, our days are becoming longer, just minutes by minutes every day, just a little bit. Not hours and hours yet. It gets to be hours and hours, a few minutes at a time. Then come summertime, that's when it gets when the sun stays up much later in the night. Right? And the sun a lot of times is still awake when you guys go to bed. Yep. The light strengthened, the mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed whiter and the warm wind blew. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. What, Jimmy? Can you possibly wait? Unless it's an emergency and you absolutely have to go, you need to wait. Okay? Then go, but you're missing the end of the story, and that's your choice. And stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, he noticed something moved. He stepped and stared closer. Oh, I think I forgot to show you the picture of the really fat rat, too. Sorry, I got distracted because y'all were asking me 1,000 questions. I'll show you guys in a second. He's a really fat blob.
Oh my gosh! He's so fat.
You can't bring your face in the wrong direction, girlfriend. I don't know who you're staring at.
Yeah, this flavor's so good. This looks like a I think this we're not about to go up the sun and everything. That's all, we're not going to get into right now.
But you still have garbage on the floor, Miss Anaya. You need to pick that up and throw it away. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Remember, he was watching the precious egg sack. Okay. As he stood there, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and he stared. A tiny spider had crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand. No bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray with a black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely. Two more little spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed round and round on the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more little spiders, then 8, then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal, right? Then he ran around in circles, kicking manure into the air. Then he turned a backflip. Then he planted his front feet and came to a stop in front of Charlotte's children. Hello there, he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so small, Wilbur couldn't hear it. I'm an old friend of your mother's, said Wilbur. I'm glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right? The little spiders waved their forelegs at him. Wilbur could see by the way they acted they were glad to see him. Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need? The young spiders just waved. For several days and several nights, they crawled here and there, up and down and about, waving at Wilbur, trailing tiny drag lines behind them and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count, but he knew he had a great many new friends. Or couldn't count them because there were too many and they were too tiny. They grew quite rapidly. Soon, each was about as big as a BB shot. They went from being a teeny tiny little grain of sand to about as big as a BB shot. Okay? They made tiny webs near the egg sac. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened a door on the north side. A warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of damp earth, of spruce woods, of sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updraft. One spider climbed to the top of the fence. Then it did something that came as a great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets into the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed a balloon. The spider let go of the fence and rose. As Wilbur watched, the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. Goodbye, it said as it sailed through the doorway. Wait a minute, screamed Wilbur. Where do you think you're going? But the spider was already out of sight. Then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, made a balloon, and sailed away. Then another spider and another. The air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a spider. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate.
Oh my God. Wait, I wanted to see the...
I'll show you. Okay, so those are the spiders. Yeah, you missed the picture of the fat rat because you left us and went to the bathroom. There's the spiders jumping into the wind. Okay, bubbles in your mouth, please. Thank you. All right, so the spiders flying away slowly, one by one. Your little balloons. Okay. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. Come back, children, he cried. Goodbye, they called. Goodbye, goodbye. At last, one little spider took time enough to stop and talk to Wilbur before making its balloon. We're leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment for setting forth We are aeronauts, and we are going into the world to make webs for ourselves. But where? Asked Wilbur. Wherever the wind takes us. High, low, near, far. East, west, north, south. We take the breeze, we go as we please. Are all of you going? Asked Wilbur. You can't all go. I'll be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want that to happen, I'm sure. The air was now so full of balloonists that the barn cellar almost looked as though a mist had gathered. Balloons, what? Do you want to know what a mist is? So kind of like a fog. We'll see if we have time later. Okay? But you were told you'd miss things if you chose to leave at that moment. Okay? But we'll see if we have time later. A mist is gathered like a fog. Balloons by the dozens were rising, circling, and drifting away through the door, sailing off on gentle winds. Cries of goodbye, goodbye, goodbye came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch anymore. In sorrow, he sank to the ground and he closed his eyes. It seemed like the end of the world. So to be deserted by Charlotte's children, Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke, it was late in the afternoon. He looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked at the air. The balloonists were gone. He looked in. Then he walked drearily to the doorway where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there thinking of her when he heard in a small voice, "Salutations," it said. "I'm up here." "So am I," said another tiny voice. "So am I," said a third voice. "Three of us are saying, we like this place and we like you." Wilbur looked up. At the top of the doorway, 3 small webs were being constructed. I'll take it around to everybody. 3 small webs are being constructed. Hold on. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. "Can I take this to mean," asked Wilbur, "that you have definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar, and that I'm going to have 3 friends?" "You can indeed," said the spiders. "What are your names, please?" asked Wilbur, trembling with joy.
I cannot see it. Miss Kennison, one time we found a spider in the kitchen, and it had like the red or the black on its stomach. I know you guys are scared, right now. I've seen that actually get wrong.
And I have. Anyway. Hey, Rudy, did you see?
So, that one time, I just be sick on her.
All right, we're gonna keep going. Put a bubble in your mouth, in your mouth. Put a bubble in your mouth, in your mouth. Hey, get the bubble in your mouth. It should not hear you. Put the bubble in your mouth, in your mouth. Okay, thank you guys. What are your names, please? Asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. "I will tell you my name," replied the first little spider, "if you tell me why you're trembling." "I'm trembling with joy," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Joy," said the first spider. "That was my mother's middle initial." "What was my mother's middle initial?" asked the second spider. "A," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Arania," said the spider. "How about me then?" said the third spider. "Will you pick out a nice, sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too dumb. Wilbur thought hard. Nellie, he suggested. Fine, I like that very much, said the third spider. You may call me Nellie. She daintily fastened her orb line to the next spoke of the web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on this very important occasion. Joy, Arania, Nellie, he began, welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hallowed doorway from which to string your webs. I think it is only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever. I pledge mine, said Joy. I do too, said Arania. And so do I, said Nellie, who just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on, the months and the years came, and as he came and went, he was never without friends. Sophia, please don't chit-chat. Fern did not come regularly to the barn anymore. She was growing up and was careful to avoid childish things, like sitting on a milk stool near a pig pen. But Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, year after year, lived in the doorway. Each spring, there were new little spiders hatching to take the place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph and the miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good, day and night, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbur. The warm, delicious cellar with the garrulous geese, the changing seasons, the heat of the sun, the passage of the swallows, the nearness of rats, the sameness of sheep, the love of spiders, the smell of manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. The end. We just finished Charlotte's Web. Yay! We'll see, Jimmy. Maybe right before recess you can see it. All right, that is